Welcome back. We're so glad you're joining us for another week. Last week, I shared the story of women who came to me for help with their business because they realized they were stuck, but they just didn't know how to get out of that self-sabotaging loop that they were in. And last week, we looked at 5 symptoms that were dead giveaways that you might not be as recovered from narcissistic abuse as you'd like to be. And we looked at imposter syndrome and distrusting yourself. One that I called lackluster and trudging, being wound too tight, and distrusting of God, distrustful and distrusting, like in the active form, I guess the verb form, you could say through the days, that just in subtle ways, not trusting God. So now this week, we're going to unpack how to begin the process of breaking that self-sabotaging loop by examining 5 assumptions that you need to question so you can get better. And I know last week, Wendy, we talked about just that process of awareness and some things to do to help you gain awareness to catch yourself when these symptoms are manifesting. And there's going to be some more that we're going to dive into a little bit further, because now we're going to assume that you've seen that symptom manifesting, but now we want to we're going to start unpacking it at deeper and deeper levels here. So we're going to start with these 5 assumptions that we need to question. And these assumptions come about because they're the result of trying to make sense of what we've been through. Like, we're logical people. We go through something, we start to roll it in our head, and we try to make sense of things. Like, why did this happen? Or, but the problem with that is that we lacked complete information. We didn't see the full picture, and maybe the information we had was inaccurate in many ways. So then the conclusions that we drew from that are inherently flawed. And this leads us to assume certain truths that we thought were truths, but the reality is they're falsehoods. And
or they might have even been partially true 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Great
because
point.
A lot of times we think certain things, make decisions, draw conclusions, and they were true then. But time has moved on, and we have moved on, and maybe even that tiny partial truth that was there isn't true at all anymore. And part of gaining that awareness is figuring out, what do I really think about this? What am I really acting on? Because what we think leads to what we feel, which leads to what we do. And the assumption that a lot of people have under imposter syndrome, that sort of lie that might have been partially true at the beginning of something, is I need to work harder, maybe 10 times harder, maybe 100 times harder than anybody else, so I won't be exposed as a fraud. So people won't realize I don't deserve this spot, or I shouldn't be here. And so I have to work really, really hard. I have to know what everybody else knows, not just for my job, but for everybody's job. I need to be able to do things that maybe I wasn't even trained to do, but I have to be the go-to person. I can't ever let anybody down. I can't ever not know something. I can't ever not be ready at a moment's notice to fix something.
So what you said is really important. And I know, Wendy, you're really great, especially when it comes to imposter syndrome, because you work with so many women who, they're go-getter type women, but they're also people pleasers. And, when you combine that into a work environment, sometimes it leads to not so great outcomes in the middle of that. But when we say assumptions, okay, it's not just the symptom of this, but there's an assumption that means it's a given in our mind. Like, we're not even questioning it. We just take this as, okay, well, this is the core truth here. And so all decisions I make from this point forward are based on that foundation. And when that foundation is flawed, then we're like heading down a path as a result of that does not take us in a good place. So what's some variations on a theme that you see with it? I mean, we listed that core assumption, we need to work 10 times harder than anyone else, so I won't be exposed as a fraud. That's like the underlying thing, which is a fear. We'll talk about that another time. But what's some variations on a theme that go along with this?
Well, if you are already working 10 times harder than everybody else, it might be that their 40-hour week is your 80-hour week. You're already overworking, most likely. So the other assumption is that you're going to have to avoid certain goals or challenges or situations either because you're worried about being exposed, because you feel like you're not good enough or you're that fraud, or also simply you're already overworked. You can't add one more thing. You actually can't add one more thing. You're already working too hard. And so that's the variation on that assumption is they have to work harder than everybody else. Means you are working harder than everybody else, and you can't add anything else, whether it's for you or somebody else.
Right. And what I've noticed too with women that I've worked with is that when they go to step toward a goal, because sometimes these are really goal-oriented women, which is the irony in the middle of all this, but they'll set a goal, and when they go to step toward the goal, the minute they step out of their comfort zone, that's when this stuff starts kicking in. And all of a sudden, the anxiety starts to kick in. They start thinking, if I press forward, what happens if I can't do it? What happens if this doesn't work? You know, and the bar is even higher if you're doing this in a work situation. You have a boss that has assigned you a particular goal that you're going after, because now you're worried about your paycheck. You're worried about your job, if that's the case. And so what I would see happening a lot is they would start making excuses to justify why they couldn't hit the goal, or they would not accept a goal, or they wouldn't even set the goal to begin with, because the more this happens, the more you lose your confidence, the less you're willing to try in the future, right? I mean, would you agree with that, Wendy?
Oh, completely. Because imposter syndrome's already lying to you. It's already telling you that you're not good enough, which is most likely a lie. You are most likely, if you fall into these categories, already overqualified and hardworking and smart, and you know what you're doing and you're good at it. So it's already lying to you. But if it can expand that lie and make you more afraid, more concerned, more fearful, more distrusting of your own ability, it will take that space. If you give imposter syndrome a little bit of space, it will use that to steal more. And it will just increase the fears you're already feeling and the insecurities you are already feeling. It will take space if you give it to it.
Yeah. And remember, we have a spiritual enemy who would like nothing more than to amp this up in us, right? So on one hand, there's like one of two ditches that we fall in here that we're talking about. The one ditch is that you drive yourself to excel and you do 10 times more than anyone else just to feel equal. The other ditch is you shrink back. Things that you're perfectly capable of, you shrink back from that. So you never accomplish what you could.
No.
You never reap the benefits of what's possible for you. So you wind up living small and operating from the shadows because of where you feel safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It self-sabotage you, and it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy, no matter which ditch you end in, because the one side will tell you, I only got here because I worked harder than everybody else and I sort of fooled them. And the other ditch will tell you, well, I had to be here because I didn't have any choice and I couldn't really reach that goal. Both will lie.
Yeah. So this can happen to anyone, whether there's narcissistic abuse or not.
Yes.
And I know, Wendy, you work with women who do have narcissistic abuse and who don't. And you see these types of things, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Imposter syndrome is very common, and it's not an actual syndrome. It's not like you can go to a therapist and get diagnosed with imposter syndrome, right? There are mental health diagnoses that I used to give people all the time when I practiced. Imposter syndrome was never one of them because it's not an actual diagnosis. What it is it's shorthand for describing a set of self-beliefs and, like you said, assumptions that people, usually really high-functioning people, are working from that drive them, but it's the wrong type of gas for the engine. And that's all we're talking about. It's either self-punishing or it's self-limiting, but it's the wrong type of gas for the engine. And if you were running the right type of gas, the right beliefs about yourself and your capacity and your capability and the amount of work you have to put in, you might be able to go, and you most likely would be able to go farther, faster, without the detours. So that's what we're talking about, is really just a clump of beliefs. And some people will have this part and some people will have that part, but that all clumps together in the same sort of imposter syndrome. But really, it's just a bunch of assumptions and faulty beliefs that you need to stop and say, because we were talking last week too. So what do you do next? So what do you do next if you're thinking, yeah, the wrong gas is in the engine. I am burning too hot or too cold. And in both cases, I'm in a ditch. I'm not on the road. I'm not getting stuff done the way I need to or want to. It's really asking yourself, what am I afraid of and why? And it could be, depending on the ditch you're in, lots of different answers of, I'm afraid I'll be discovered, all the way to, I'm afraid I can't do this. There's so many things in between those two ditches too. So since you've already got your little notebook or your little note thing on your phone, and we drove you crazy with it last time, this is a good place to go. What am I afraid of and why? This does not need to be an entire journal entry unless you want it to be. Again, this can be just a couple little sentences of, I was afraid of this happening because.
Right.
Don't worry about the grammar. Don't worry about the spelling. Don't worry about the punctuation. Just get the idea down, because all you really need is the data. That's all you need. Not beautiful prose, data.
And what am I afraid of? And especially for someone who's been through narcissistic abuse, some of these fears are implanted deliberately by the narcissist to sabotage you, you know? So it's important for you to recognize where that's in operation. You know, if you see the symptom, take a look at what the belief is, and then ask yourself, like, what is fueling that belief?
Exactly.
You know, so that's what we're talking about through here. All right. Good stuff. So join us again tomorrow, because we're going to take a look at the next hidden false assumption. We're going to unpack that a little bit, and that assumption that's driving your struggle with just being able to trust your own judgment. Boy, that leads to all kinds of problems. So we're going to take a look at that tomorrow. But right now, we encourage you to partner with God and expect to see Him do immeasurably more than you asked or hoped for. And we're going to be with you on this journey to provide some guidance and some wisdom, and we're going to challenge you to grow. So today we want you to focus on being just maybe 1% better than you were yesterday or than you were last week, because all those 1%ers are going to add up. So be sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode to help other people. You'll find some links to some helpful resources in the description. You can also reach out and email us at hello@AnnetteChesney.com. Keep going, because we promise you that your best is yet to come. We'll see you tomorrow.